Let's end on a fun one. If you had not become this incredible researcher that you are, what do you think you would have done as an opposing career?
Well, growing up, I always wanted to be an astronaut. So something to do with space is probably it.
I did just see they are accepting people to pretend to live on Mars. You don't actually get to go there, but you can pretend for a year and they're studying that. Just saying.
I do love all things space, so you never know.
Podcast is out of this world. We are so excited for our second interview with Dr. Sonia Cabell. She is an associate professor at the Florida Center for Reading Research at Florida State University. Nicole and I got to spend the whole day with her, not only doing this interview, but also learning deeply about her new Strive for 5 framework and how that applies to you as an educator in your classroom.
Enjoy. Recording?
It is.
Okay, great. All right. I wonder if we look at each other or do we look forward?
What do you think?
We've never recorded
like
We've
this.
never recorded. This is new.
I think we look at each other and we talk to each other.
Okay.
I agree.
It's a conversation.
Right.
Perfect. Perfect.
All right.
What up, girl?
I'm excited. I'm actually really excited you're here at the Florida Center for Reading Research.
Thank you for having us. And thank you for giving us your time this morning. It is so exciting to talk to you, especially knowing that Strive for 5 has recently been released. Congratulations to you and Trisha.
Trisha and I are really excited about Strive for 5 because it represents our work together over a couple of decades now. And we're really proud of it. We're really excited that it's resonating with teachers. So
Excellent. Yeah. No surprise. So for those of us who are new to Strive for 5, I'm sorry. Tell us about it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. So we didn't make up the term Strive for 5. Okay. So the term was really pioneered by researcher David Dickinson and of Vanderbilt University. And he talked about, you know, when you have conversations, having back and forth conversations, that Strive for 5 turns. And when we talk about Strive for 5, so we're not saying you have to stop at 5 turns. You can keep going, but at least 5 turns. So a turn is, I say, when the speaker changes is the turn. So I say something, you say something, I say something, you say something, I say something. That is a 5-turn conversation. And it happens really fast. And it can be less than a minute within our daily experience in the classroom.
So this isn't a whole curriculum. It's really just a very small marginal shift to what they're already doing.
Exactly. That's how Trisha and I like to talk about this. It is a marginal shift to what teachers are already doing. They're having conversations with kids throughout their day. And it's a way of thinking about those conversations in ways that can develop their language comprehension.
And I think that's so important that such great things are happening in classrooms. We don't realize that being just even a little bit more intentional with our time and our language is going to make such a difference.
Yes, and I agree. Like, you don't really realize how much, like as a teacher, I didn't even think about language. I wasn't even trained on how important language was when I was a 2nd grade teacher and when I was a reading coach back in the Reading First days and working with kindergarten to 3rd grade classrooms. But those language interactions lay the foundation for everything that we're doing. And it lays the foundation for children's development in reading. So that's why I became, enamored with oral language development and helping children grow their oral language development, which in our country has been really hard to do. It's hard to grow children's language to the point that it affects their reading.
No, last night we were sitting and had dinner last night. One of the things you brought up was you didn't realize just how much this mattered to you until you had your own child.
Well, it's when you have your own child, at least for me, that I really thought, what do I really believe about all the things I've been preaching? And what I realized is I really believed the oral language. And I would have conversations with my child as an infant. These are called proto-conversations, where the interaction goes back and forth. He wasn't talking until 1 year old, but we were having these back and forth interactions. I also did things like event casted or narrated what I was doing. while I was doing it, like I'm putting this fork in the dishwasher. And I began to see that, and not only me, so the others around him too. So my husband looked at what I was doing and adopted that. And I felt like by 7 months old, Joseph was able to understand what we were saying because he was reacting in ways that showed that he understood. And I was again struck at how smart young children are. And as a teacher, how much I had taken kind of for granted that fact. And I think now if I went back into the classroom, I think I would have a different perspective on how smart young children are, that I always thought they were smart, but now I'm like, they're brilliant. They're even more brilliant than any of us. And they're able to take in a lot, and their language grows tremendously in that birth to 5 period, especially just kind of explodes. And so laying a foundation for them in the birth to 5 and then in the kindergarten, 1st grade, those early years is so important to build their language comprehension.
That really resonated with me when you were talking about how you were narrating your day basically to this infant who you would think is just staring at you with big, beautiful eyes. And I was thinking about how many early childhood teachers something like that would resonate with, or teachers of English learners. We talk about how every opportunity to engage with these children is to build language early on. So just something so simple that I would never think to do. Okay, I'm walking over to my desk now and I'm going to grab our papers and I'm going to pass them out to you. That's not how we conduct ourselves naturally, right. But to be intentional and realize the relational words you're teaching. I'm going over here now, and then I'll place them on top of your desk. All of this language just seems like such a good opportunity we always say make the most of our instructional minutes. Your curriculum's never going to tell you to do that, right?
Yeah. I think that when we think about it, how it might translate into the classroom, I think about how we think aloud about things, think aloud about our own processes. Yeah. And I feel like this is in the same camp of things.
Yeah.
Like thinking aloud about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and building children's language that way. It doesn't mean that the teacher needs to be doing all the talking. In fact, we want children to be talking a lot, right? We want to engage, but we want to engage them in conversation, not just they're talking a lot or we're talking a lot, but how do we engage them in conversation? And then how do we also do the things that you're talking about by enriching their language through adding vocabulary and adding ideas? And that's often best done building on what a child is already interested in or what they've already said, because they're tuned to that, versus they could tune us out when we're just like talking about stuff. I think they do. No, sometimes, I don't know.
It's especially interesting that this was born out of that work with the multilingual population. Nicole and I have had the honor of working closely with Dr. Elsa Cardenas-Hagan on conducting utterances. So I think this really lends a great protocol and support to help teachers with that as well.
Yeah, so Strive for 5 was developed primarily by Tricia, developing the protocol of how this works and testing it out over time. So Tricia and I have tested this out on her curriculum called Developing Talkers. Developing Talkers, Tricia has also authored the language module of Pre-Can My Way that does the things that Developing Talkers does, and also has that Strive for 5. So it's primarily a read aloud language curricular supplement for both Tier 1 and Tier 2 settings in an MTSS context. And so through that work and through work that we've done on projects called Teaching Together, where we have the home and school component more aligned, all of that work was done in a multilingual way and with multilingual populations. Maria Carlo was also part of that work as well. And so the strategies that you see in Strive for 5 are applicable to all learners. And I'm really excited about that because we kind of take for granted that these were developed with multilingual learners. But I think that's an important point that we should be making so that people know that this is not just for monolingual English speakers, but for everyone.
So talk me through, I'm that second grade teacher you were, and I'm listening to this podcast and I wanna start to incorporate this next day.
Right.
How can I start to incorporate this if I didn't order your book yet, 2-day Prime?
Yeah.
Gotta wait a bit, how can I start right away?
Yeah, so now our book was written with pre-K to first grade in mind,
Okay.
but we think that the Strive for Five framework is applicable and up the grades as well in second grade and so forth. So a lot of second grade teachers have told us that I've been using this, and then as I've been talking with other other teachers and other administrators, they are like, we know how this can apply to our 3rd through 5th grade. So we've been hearing a lot of like that it's more applicable to a broader audience. But basically the Strive for Five framework, we started with we have three teacher moves in there: turn 1, turn 3, and turn 5. So turn 1 starts with an open-ended question that the teacher poses. The student responds in turn 2. And based on whether that response is correct or partially correct or incorrect, we either scaffold upward to provide more challenge or scaffold downward to provide more support for children. Then they take a 4th turn, and then the teacher and the 5th turn praise and rephrases what the child says or expands on what they say. Okay, so that is the framework itself. We aren't saying that's the only way a conversation happens. It's a flexible framework. A child can start a conversation, of course. A teacher can start a conversation in a different way than besides asking an open-ended question. But we have found that if teachers can learn it in one context and be more aware of doing that in one context, they can more easily transfer that to other contexts. So the context we tend to talk about or start with is the book reading context. So I'd love to talk about how it might unfold in that context.
Okay, yeah,
Okay,
let's
cool.
do it.
So in a read aloud, the teacher often sets a purpose for reading, right? And asks a guiding question. I want you to think about this question as you're reading. And then at the end of the read aloud, the teacher comes back to this guiding question. Now, depending on your program you're using or how you do your read alouds, we have programs where the teacher might be reading the same book multiple times and asking different questions during each subsequent read, and asking more inferential or abstract questions to promote verbal reasoning as the days go by. But that teacher poses when the teacher comes back to that guiding question at the end, she asks it again, and then she picks an equity stick. And an equity stick is like writing children's names on popsicle sticks and choosing one. So the children don't know whose name is going to be called, but they all have an equal chance. So they're all thinking about the question, and the teacher asks it, and she chooses an equity stick after asking the question, not before. After, and that child answers, and she has that Strive for Five with that child right there in front of that whole group, and it lasts a very brief amount of time. So in teacher asking that question, we try to make sure that that's an open-ended question. And an open-ended question is one that doesn't necessarily that you can't answer with just one word, like a yes or no question. And one that also may have multiple answers. Doesn't have to have multiple answers, but may have multiple correct answers. But basically, children can answer it, can't answer it just using one word.
Such as, how do you think this character felt when X happened?
Exactly. That is a really good example.
Or how would you feel?
You know, whenever you shift a question to why, why tends to be more open-ended.
Okay. Good.
Why and a lot of hows. Now, how many becomes closed-ended,
Mhm.
or the yes or no types of questions.
Mhm.
But, you know, when you want to probe about how would you feel, then you would also then want to probe on the next turn. Why, right? That's the upward scaffold.
Yes.
So if you say, so give me your question. How would you feel?
How would you feel if you were the character who was left out of the playgroup?
Sad. So the child might say sad.
Right. Why would you feel sad?
Right, okay, so why would you feel sad? So what you just did for me is you provided me an upward scaffold that asked that question that required more of that abstract reasoning, or more of that verbal reasoning, right? And then I answer again, I would feel sad because nobody's playing with me. And and then in the fifth conversation turn, you might say something like, yes, you felt sad because you were left out, or you could provide a vocabulary word that would, right, I was trying,
Got that.
provide a vocabulary word that means the same thing that the child is saying, expand their vocabulary and
Right,
expand
you
what
would
they're
feel
saying.
isolated.
Exactly,
My
right.
favorite thing, one of my favorite go-tos is those synonyms and substitutions.
That's great. So that right there, isolated is a very good, I would feel because nobody was playing with me. And then the teacher might say, yes, you would feel isolated because you were being left out.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden you've affirmed that student, right? You have made that student feel like their answer mattered, and we can go back, and she wanted to probe why. So there's a social emotional thing happening there. So within conversations that we have, part of being a conversational responsive partner is being warm
Mm-hmm.
and being able to go back and forth. Child knows that you care about them.
Right.
So you'll know why. It's not just an exercise in providing more language, right? It's also comes when you are wanting to engage with that child, and they'll feel that. Now let's think about that downward scaffold.
Yes.
So, what was the first question we used again? How
would you feel being that character?
Let's frame that just a little bit so that it's, so how did Delilah in our story feel? And you say happy.
Happy, yeah.
Okay, and so like this is Delilah's being left out. Okay, so it's the same scenario.
Yeah.
And you might say in response to that, you want a downward scaffold because you want to get the child toward the correct response. You don't want them to just think Delilah was happy, because clearly that she wasn't, right? And so the child could say happy, or I don't know, or say nothing. And you might say, was she happy or sad? So you reduce the choices, and you might make an obvious reduction of choice.
Would you add the example, like perhaps the student forgot that the big portion of this was she was being left out? Would you say, well, remember when Delilah was left out? Would you feel happy or sad?
Exactly, that's even better, right? Remember when Delilah was left out, would you feel happy or sad? Or do you think she feels happy or sad? So that's even better because it reminds the student, you can show that picture too of Delilah being left out of the play. And so in that way, and then in reducing the choices is one way of downward scaffolding, and we have several upward and downward scaffolding types, but it's one way of downward scaffolding is to reduce choices. Another way is to provide what's called a close technique, which is like a fill in the blank. It's like a fancy term for fill in the blank. I don't know why we just don't say fill in the blank. Anyway.
Synonyms and substitutions.
Exactly. You could say, she felt, she's sad. Okay, so you're even giving them a little bit of it. But the thing is, you don't want to like start there and only do the downward scaffold. You want to make sure that you're challenging their thinking.
I think, we had this discussion last night, but this idea of sentence starters, that we're always giving these sentence starters, maybe we're over scaffolding that first initial response. We're seeing a lot of over scaffolding happening in other areas of literacy instruction. So I think this is a very important piece. I totally agree, because what I see in early writing and the scaffolds that teachers in kindergarten, for example, might give for spelling is that sometimes teachers will go to the most supportive scaffold. So
it would be, in this framework, it would be like a downward scaffold of like just spelling the word for the child. Well, they're not doing any of the work then, so you want to have them do the work and say, okay, what sounds do you hear in this word? Let's stretch it out together. Have them do the work first. Like, what sounds do you hear in mom? And then they do something, and then you, based on what they say, you write or say, you scaffold that. So it's the same idea where you want them to do the thinking. However, you want to make sure you're scaffolding them toward a correct response.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's definitely, the scaffold piece is huge. We do often start with that most supportive scaffold. Like you said, people don't realize how brilliant these children
Right.
are that are in front of us, and we need to have those high expectations to start.
Yeah, so like at turn 1, in our example, we didn't say, was Delilah happy or sad, right? But sometimes we find ourselves in conversational patterns where we keep on asking closed-ended questions.
Right.
And we only want that one response from the child, and it has to be that, and then we're just gonna move to the next child until we get the response we like. We're just saying, make the marginal shift of having a few more back and forth exchanges with that child to promote their language development. And I think it goes so far in doing that.
You're right, even often in class, they might say an open-ended, if the child gets it wrong, hey, Nicole, I'm calling on you, how did Delilah feel? You say happy, let's try someone else. And now Nicole's invalidated in class, maybe we'll shut down further.
Right, and then Nicole learns to, she's gonna check out, right? The same thing with, if the teacher always calls on the same students, other students check out. That's why the use of something like equity sticks can be helpful. Everybody's thinking about the question the teacher asks, everybody's expected to think about the question, you pick the equity stick, and then you have that conversation. I have had the question, do the other students like tune out during that?
I was just gonna ask you that.
And if they know that that's the routine, we don't see that. We don't see the other kids tuning out. We see, you can have 3 strive for 5s based on that one guiding question. You can have 1 strive for 5 with this child, with this child, with this child, and they might answer that, depending on the question, answer things in different ways. And so you can scaffold them in different ways and still stay on your general topic that you're talking about. It doesn't mean you have to have in every whole group setting, you're having a one-on-one with every kid in your classroom. That's not what we're saying. But we do encourage teachers across their day to use all of the equity sticks somewhere across their day, so they're having a strive for 5 with every child every day. And the reason that's important is because sometimes children who have lower language skills, or children who are English learners, sometimes children who are shy, they won't initiate those conversations in the same way that their peers might.
I was just gonna ask you that. So I love the book example. I think that's extremely relevant. What other circumstances would you see teachers using this? But it feels like all day.
Yes, across your day. And so in the book, we provide examples from like book reading, guided play, so center time and things like that. We provide, we think about it when you're out at recess, transitions, things like that. But there are many times, whether they're there's teacher managed times, like Carol Connor's work talked about teacher managed and child managed instruction and times. And so the teacher managed times, like that whole group or the circle time, depending on what grade we're talking about, and small group, and more child managed times, like the centers, free play, depending on the grade level, meals. So there's opportunities to have conversations throughout your day, and research has shown that teachers, there are certain contexts in which teachers tend to have better conversations with children, and certain contexts that make it easier. The book reading context is one that makes it easier because you have some things to talk about, right? And so thinking about, if you ask a teacher, change the nature of everything you're talking, change the nature of how you're talking with kids across the day. We actually did that in a study that was led by Dr. Laura Justice that I was a part of during my early career. We trained preschool teachers to be conversationally responsive partners, but we didn't necessarily give them specific contexts to use the conversational responsive strategies in. So they ended up not really implementing. They were able to successfully start the conversations, but they had trouble doing the language modeling kinds of things that we're talking about. Like building the language structures, through modeling syntax, or building the, pushing for abstract language, because it was, I think, too abstract. So I think if you narrow down into a context and practice a framework like this in a context, you can then more easily transfer it out to other contexts.
Absolutely. So if we had my equity sticks out, right, and I said, all right, I'm gonna ask for someone to tell us, what do you think Dr. Cabell's main takeaways from this session were? And I said, oh, Sonia, it's your turn. What would you say? What are big takeaways from what you want people to walk away with today?
Yeah, I think some of the big takeaways are that the Strive for 5 framework is a marginal shift in what teachers are already doing well. And we want to make sure that we're attuned to having conversations with all children. We also want those conversations to count. So in our book, we structured our chapters around Hollis Scarborough's reading rope, particularly the language comprehension pieces. And in thinking about all of those pieces, I love all of those pieces because it includes how background knowledge is really critical, right? So we have a chapter on background knowledge, for example, building knowledge through conversations, building abstract reasoning through conversations, building syntax, the structures, the language structures through conversations, literacy knowledge, all of the pieces of the language comprehension part of Hollis's rope. And I think when we think about the importance of oral language and how important it is to lay that foundation for children for their later reading development, and both their decoding and their comprehension development, language plays an important underlying role. And again, this is like a one-on-one that could take place in a group, or it could take place in a dyad, or it could take place in a small group. But this is just thinking about, how do I keep it going just a little bit longer to provide more vocabulary, to provide a language model for children. And so that's what we're saying with this book. It's a marginal shift that gets kids talking.
Love it. What an awesome conversation we had. This has been super fun getting to know you. I feel like right after this podcast, we're all gonna make friendship bracelets.
That'd be awesome. I would love it.
We gotta see the rest of FCRR. We got a lot of things.
That'd be great.
But before we head out, what are the big things? I know you have this amazing book that we're excited to share, Strive for 5, but what else are you up to? Anything else you want to share out with the community?
Recently, some of my colleagues and I also wrote a Birth to 5 book. So through National Association for the Education of Young Children, NACY. And that book was led by Tanya Wright. It included myself and Nell Duke and Mariana Soto Manning. And it's a lot of great examples of literacy in all areas from birth to 5 and how to develop that for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. And then also for those who want to learn more about the research, we have a book through Guilford called The Handbook on the Science of Early Literacy that came out in 2023. And myself and Susan Newman and Nicole Patentary, who's the director of FCRR, we all are editors on that volume. So I would encourage people to check those out if they're interested in those resources.
Absolutely. All right, Meg, I loved that interview so much. We had so much fun. Lots of bloopers came out of that episode. What are you thinking? What was your favorite part of the Strive for 5 and our interview with Sonia?
Well, I think, everyone's talking about oral language. It's like all the rage. Oral language, even people are calling it the big 6 instead of the big 5, really emphasizing oral language. And what I love about this framework is it's so easy. It takes just a couple extra seconds to be a little bit more deliberate in our conversations, and the impact is huge. What about you?
I love that too. I think people love to be affirmed, right? That we're doing really amazing things. Everyone, like you said, is hopefully prioritizing oral language development. The Strive for 5 framework and the tips included in this book really get you to think about marginal shifts that are going to make a difference. so that just really resonated with me, that there are things I'm already doing in classrooms, things I see teachers already doing really well. If we could prompt just a little bit further, or think about how many times we dismiss and say, good job, or let's ask someone else. If we just make those tiny changes, we're really improving not just oral language, right? It's not just talking, it's all of these language systems, semantics, syntax, everything that goes into it. And again, it can be done really well with marginal shifts. So I hope it was inspiring to people. I hope it resonated. If you haven't checked out the book, you absolutely want to. Not only is the text incredible, but the video examples in it, the resources in it, it just keeps on giving. So
Yeah,
thank
Nicole, I
you.
totally agree. Thank you guys so much for popping into episode 2. And we're so excited to see you next time at Recess. Bye.
See ya.